Apologize, I just forgot to hit the record button. Sorry about that. I'm sorry, Dave. Could you repeat the question?
Any examples of the authorities getting ahead of a problem and making a rule before the players were able to exploit it and raise the issue themselves?
You know, I mean, I'll let Mark think about that while I sort of answer a little differently. Is one of the things that's interesting is that one of the reasons the baseball rule book is, I think, so long and all the rules around player signings is so complicated is that if there's a rule book, as soon as there's, you know, someone smart, whether it's, you know, John McGraw or whether it's somebody today, is figuring out a way to get around those rules. And so then, you know, someone figures out a legal loophole, and then you have to close that because people don't feel that that's fair by changing the rules. So I think that it's more of the authorities are sort of following along, making the rules. It's when something goes along for a while and they don't make that rule, or there's a loophole that sort of explodes at one time, and because there's some new invention. You know, the spitball, for example, you know, these 10-day suspensions maybe weren't all that effective, but you know, how big a deal is it if someone's putting a little Vaseline on it that generally gets caught once in a while? And there's a cost to, as we were talking about earlier, like with Karen check last night, there's a cost to policing this. Whether it's spitballs or other things, you know, it's a cost in both time. It's intrusive into the game. And so if it's not a huge problem, to a certain degree, it's just like, well, let's just leave it alone, like driving 65 in a 60-mile-an-hour zone. And then once in a while, you have to sort of do something to stop it. So I'd say no. I mean, I can't think of in off the top of my head where they got in front of it. But the key is that you try and keep the problem from exploding and causing this chaos. And again, that's a lot of that has to do with the fact that for pitches, for example, you had the combination of both spider tack, which was a particularly good substance for gripping the ball. And then you had the high-speed video so that pitchers could sort of make designer pitchers and watch their fingers and their wrists and exactly what they did and what happened. And so you had sort of this confluence of things that made a sort of a small problem explode into a big one. And therefore you had to try and do something. The same a little bit with sign stealing, and that you had these video replay rooms right next to the dugouts. And so all of a sudden you had this new temptation where maybe previously the problem wasn't that big. So again, I would say that no, getting in front of it hasn't been, I can't think of something, but the issue is if you let something go and then all of a sudden circumstances change and you let it get in front and they don't get in front of it, that's where the problem comes.
So Dan, you're kind of saying, if I understood you correctly, there's kind of an unwritten rule of there's acceptable cheating and unacceptable cheating, and where is that line? And if that's correct, if you're playing that out with the Astro situation, did Major League, I guess I just don't remember, did Major League Baseball publicly or privately convey you're getting close to that line, or sense or anything like that to the teams in general, the Astros in particular, or did it just come down as a bolt out of the blue that after this player, the former pitcher said what they were doing?
No, it was not a bolt out of the blue. So the quick story from my perspective is that around 2000, baseball came out and actually said, transmitting electronics to the dugout is an infraction. You can't do that. And there was a couple of sort of nominal cases of sign stealing based on transmitting to the dugout. No one was ever really punished, but it wasn't seemed to be all that common. And then there was the Boston Red Sox Apple Watch controversy, where there was a team representative in the dugout with an Apple Watch who was getting feedback from someone in the replay booth as to what signs might be coming. And then in response to that, Rob Manfred, gave his penalty. And this was middle of September 2017, saying, all right, we're punishing the Red Sox. And oh, by the way, at this point, I'm drawing a line in the sand. And if anybody's caught, you know, I'm going to put this on the general manager and the manager, partially because he didn't have the power to punish the players because there was no union agreement. But he said, I'm going to punish the GM and the manager. And that was September 2017. Well, I mean, the Astros went beyond that. And I think that I mean, he clearly drew the line in the sand. And then when the Astros became public, he lowered the boom, basically, as he said he was going to do in that memo. So I think that he tried to get in front of it. And,
Okay.
you know, I mean, and the Astros just didn't stop.
And there's reason to think that the players suspected it long before that, because they started doing this on the mound all the time. And you couldn't see a picture of a conversation on the diamond without them doing this. And there, you would see quotes like, everybody's terrified about sign stealing. And they were bragging about their lip reading and that kind of thing. So they knew it was there before it got caught.
Well, I think, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that other teams are doing it. I mean, there was lots of conversations about it. I mean, the question, which we don't know, is, was anybody doing it as sophisticatedly as the Astros, where it was happening in real time to the batter? You know, it wasn't, because a lot of them, they were getting the signals, but then it was going out to a runner at second base. They were only doing it if there was a runner at second base. So a lot of so yes, I mean, clearly there was a lot of fear of it. Other teams are doing it. The real question, again, the question is, were they doing it after September 15th or whatever the date was of 2017? And were they doing it as sort of egregiously as the Astros were?
It reminds me of probably an apocryphal story about Ernie Banks, who had a reputation for just being so tremendous and you couldn't fool him. And so they decided that they would just tell him what's coming. And they were able to strike him out because the intelligence flummoxed him so much that he wasn't ready for what was going to happen.
Well,
yeah, that's
Dan,
right. There's certainly certain batters who said they didn't want to know. So yeah, I mean, it's just all very nuanced and intricate, which makes it kind of fun.
Well, Dan, it seems like another highlight you guys made is technology. Technology continues to race forward, right? Which provides new tools, new techniques. And to your point, Mark, this is never ending, right? I mean, there new tools and techniques, new technologies will give new opportunities for legal or unlegal behavior.
Well, the thing I wanted to sort of jump in on the previous question, but it also applies to this question about the fact that this is not changing, is that in addition to new technology, you have new rules. And you know, maybe this is part of the where I am now, having spent the last couple of years thinking about this problem. Is, you know, yesterday Major League Baseball announced some new rules that they're going to take place next year, and one of them, which is probably this includes the pitch clock, of course, and the new bases and whatnot. But the one that is received the least amount of attention is the one that I'm interested in chatting about right now, which is the shift rules. And one of them seems easy enough, which is you need to have two infielders on each side of second base starting next year, which is one thing. But the other thing is that all four infielders have to have their feet on the infield dirt when the pitch is thrown. And what's interesting about that is I think Major League Baseball wants that rule for the reasons that you would think in order to reduce the shift. But me, being paranoid, said, I wonder what the infield dirt actually means, because I just did a talk at the SABR conference about the fact that, you know, the field is fairly precisely defined in the rule book, and teams have been forever. I mean, certainly back to the 1890s, people have been modifying the field to give themselves an advantage in home games, whether it's, you know, making the mound bigger or watering down the infield or making the grass really long for certain players and short for other players and whatnot. Well, the definition of where the dirt ends and the grass begins is pretty vague in the rule book. So this is absolutely an opportunity. And again, this is where where I am right
The
now.
paranoid
So
among
what
us.
can what can they do? It's a little bit vague in terms, and also the way it's written, the way the rule is written, or the way the rule was described in the press release. It implies that it doesn't just affect what we're probably all thinking right now, which is that they don't want the infielders in the outfield, so they're going to be playing like very deep on the dirt. It's also written so that they can't play in front of the dirt either. So that would affect your ability to defend a bunt, for example, which actually would be kind of cool. I mean, if but I don't know whether they're going to modify that. But anyway, back to the infield. To me, my impression, and I think what one of the lessons that we have in this book is, and this goes back to something that John McGraw said in the 19 teens, is if there's a rule, it's our job as players to try and figure out where the loopholes are. Where can we get an advantage from this rule? And sometimes that means, in McGraw even said this, sometimes we're like a half a season ahead because the rule maker's job is to defend people like me, and maybe change the rules. So if there's a situation where the home team for teams where the infielders have really strong arms, like say you could be Carlos Correa, who probably could play left field and get the guy at first base on a ground ball. Maybe the Twins want to have their dirt really deep, and then other teams maybe they don't. So this is sort of another opportunity, I think, for smart teams, and it's always the smart teams. It's always the teams that have the, and this is no offense to anyone, including myself, but the teams with the 80 people in the front in the baseball operations, those are the teams that have the manpower to think about this stuff. New rules, new opportunities for chapter 11 in our book, and also new technology. Same thing, new technology, which is your question, new opportunities.
Yeah.
That rule
Isn't the
already
same
applies
thing-
to the Eastern League. And in that league, the infielders generally start on the grass and they jump forward to their ready position on the dirt. And they seem to be allowed to charge bunts onto the infield grass whenever they want to, which isn't very often. So I don't know whether the new rule is different, but that's the way that's working.
Dave, you
Right.
had a question? Dave went offline there. Well, yeah, that's interesting, Mark. When I read that yesterday, what I was thinking was, oh my God, are we going to see now managers coming out and complaining and asking for instant replay to see if all the feet were on the dirt before the ball was pitched, and if not, what happens is, so my paranoia went in a different direction. God, it'll slow down the game with people wanting to complain about this, or all 4 feet or all 2 feet, so to speak, on the dirt.
Well, and that's another thing that isn't really necessarily even really that much part of the book, but a little bit, is that there are, for people that grew up when I did, you kind of knew who the managers were that were going to be complaining about everything, right? Like Earl Weaver. I mean,
Yeah.
Earl Weaver would absolutely try and figure out a way that some team was screwing him over or the umpires are screwing him over. And yes, I think that Earl Weaver, Billy Martin, and I'm sure there are people like that today too. And as a manager told me, when I asked him about a couple of rules, not a manager, I'm sorry, an umpire. I talked about some of the rules that I thought were not particularly well enforced, and he said, well, the managers that complain about things like coaches not standing in the coaching boxes, once in a while someone will complain about that. And he said it's always because they're mad about something else, right? They're trying to, they're pissed at the other team, or they're pissed at the umpiring crew, and they just want to make our lives harder. So I'm sure that that a lot of the manager complaints that we have seen our whole lives have to do with some other grievance that is not really part of what's going on.
Yeah. You guys sound like, just listening to you answering the questions and making your comments, sounds like you really enjoyed the work that went into preparing this book and producing the product.
You know, we did, and I think part of it is that, you know, a lot we found. I mean, I think a lot. Sorry about that. I think a lot of the stories we came up with were ones that we didn't really know or hadn't really followed through. And I mean, the stories on all of the groundskeeping stuff. And, you know, I'll let Mark tell the stories about, you know, 1962 and the Giants and the Dodgers. I mean, that was very interesting. And like we were talking about earlier on the early drug scandals. And again, just sort of the connections and how people reacted to this stuff. And yeah, I mean, there's just, you start going back. I mean, we're all baseball historians. I mean, that's why we're in SABR, and you just start going back and you just realize how many really fun things were going on, and how you can sort of tie them together in ways that hadn't been done before. And so, no, it was a lot of fun. I had a good time doing the research.
Yeah, and I would add that I'm having a lot of fun still. And that's because of the stories that I keep learning. And one of the reasons is because, I mean, I don't travel in a circle with a lot of inside baseball people, but on the occasions that I've had the opportunity to meet or interact with ex-players, and they were informed that I was working on this book, or that this book was coming out, or that this book was out, they had stories, right? That I did not know. I think players really kind of think a lot of these stories are fun to talk about, like once they're out of the game, especially. Not steroids. I think steroids has its own level of scarlet letter to it compared to the other stuff. But Dan, you should tell them the story about when you were on MLB Network and you met Jake Peavy.
Yeah, so once in a while I get on the MLB Network to talk baseball, and I was on in early August to talk about this book. And the two players, so it was MLB Now with Brian Kenny, as you guys have seen the show, and the two people that are on with him, with Jake Peavy and Al Leiter, and when you're on, they're always very friendly, but on the set.
When you're on,
but I mean, but they're very friendly, but you know, usually they aren't looking to go have lunch with you up in the lunchroom or something. But I'm in one of the rooms just sort of getting ready for the show, and Jake Peavy comes in and he says, "Who are you?" And I told him, and this was probably 45 minutes before the show, and he just wanted to start telling me cheating stories. I mean, he just sort of he just loved it. He just wanted to chat with me about cheating stories. I mean, he had a great one from 2012 where he was pitching for the White Sox in April against the Tigers. He struck out the first two players. The next guy up was Miguel Cabrera. Cabrera looks at the batter's box and says the back line's in the wrong place, and of the batter's box, because, you know, he wants to stand deep, and everybody comes out and says, you know, just go hit. Of course, the batter's box is not in the wrong place. Well, and Cabrera continues to complain, and eventually they come out and they actually measure it, and Cabrera was right. You know, the White Sox had sort of manipulated the back of the batter's box for that inning before everybody had brushed it off to keep the, to keep the White Sox, or so that the Tigers had to bat from a different spot. And Peavy was joking about how the players were all yelling at him like he had done it and set it up, and he just loved it. And that, you know, so it's a great story, and he had some other ones too. I actually said after the show, I said, "Here, you want to, you know, after you offered him a copy of the book," he said, "Nope, I just bought one on Amazon." So, you know, how many players would do that?
Yeah.
So to me, it just goes to the fact that the topic is just interesting to people. It's both fun and it's poignant to people, and they want to share their own thoughts on the topic or their own episodes if they were in the game.
Just out of curiosity, was Peavy part of that strategy, or just, shall we say, an innocent bystander in the
He said he was very much an innocent bystander, and he was just like, you know what, they're yelling at me, and and this is him saying, I'm just sitting there saying, hey, I didn't have anything to do with this, so no, I think if he had been guilty, he would have, at this point, he would have been happy to tell me that story.
Yeah.
And just to show you just one sort of comment on MLB Now, the show, they actually managed to find that clip.
I think I've
telling
seen
you the story, and then he was telling the story, to Brian Kinney because he remembered it. And this was, 5 minutes before the show. And for the last segment of that show, they had found the clip of, Cabrera standing there and the umpires and the grounds crew remeasuring it. So it was impressive that way as well.
Well, the other thing, so Dan, I mean, I wasn't there. Dan told me the story, and one of the more interesting parts of the story, besides the cheating angle, which is our angle, is the fact that it was Cabrera. I think that's really what's sort of cool about this story. So you had these two sort of regular players that came up, didn't notice anything, and they both struck out. And then Cabrera, that was the year he won the Triple Crown. So Cabrera comes up, and he's like this, baseball hitting genius, and he knows where the box is supposed to be. He knows where his foot's going to be. He knows he has a, very precise about how he's going to prepare himself to swing at these pitches. And he noticed immediately, like there was no hesitation. He put his foot down. You can see it in the clip, and his foot is outside the box. And he goes, "Hey, wait a minute, this isn't right." And I like the fact that it was in addition to showing the nefarious side of the game, it also shows the brilliance of the players that are cut above the other players, that he was the one that found it.
Well, I know
Wasn't there
Mark,
a pitcher a couple of years ago who was taking a hop toward the plate before he threw the ball, and they had to change the rule for him too? A relief pitcher. I mean, how many guys create need for rules rather than break them?
Yeah, no, I remember that too. I don't remember what the rule was. It always strikes me that, like, that is another rule. We don't talk about this really, I don't believe at all in the book, but there's a rule in the rule book about the pitcher and how he has to, keep contact with the rubber until he lets go of the ball. Well, that basically doesn't happen, right? I mean, if you watch a pitcher, I mean, he kind of like pushes off from the front of that rubber, but he's not really touching the rubber when he lets go of the ball. And that certainly is an area where there's, certainly the ability to, and we know that there have been pitchers that have done this sort of on purpose, where they've actually stood a foot in front of the mound, because it's all kind of a dirty mess when if you're standing 90 feet away. So the hopper, yeah, I remember that guy.
Yeah, I don't know that. I mean, I think that is sort of what Mark was talking about earlier a little bit, just in general. Where teams try and figure out a loophole, or players try and figure a loophole around the rules, whether it's teams spending the way they spend for free agents out of Latin America, and then you have to have a rule sort of closing those loopholes in terms of how the money is being distributed. So yeah, I mean, I think that much of the rule book is done in response to people, whether it's players or front offices or managers, trying to find loopholes. But I'm trying to think of another one that has to do with a player, his particular style as a pitcher, a hitter, or a fielder, and nothing comes to mind. Again, I mean, so nothing comes to the top of my head. But
Yeah,
that's a good one.
the Jake Peavy is a really good example of a player kind of, spilling the beans. But how about, have you guys had any interactions with, I'll call it management side of the house, coaches, whatever, who share off the or on or off the record with you experiences like the Jake Peavy's?
We have had some conversations with a couple in management who've sort of shared stuff off the record. And when I say off the record, I mean, we've said, hey, is that a story we can tell? And they'll basically say, no, I'd rather you didn't. It's not a lot. I mean, we didn't, as part of the book, we didn't really interview a lot of people. The one person I did interview was Al Worthington, back, who had the great story about sort of, not wanting to do the sign stealing and quitting the White Sox, which I'm happy to go through too. But most of the conversations I think we had have been since the book has come out, and people like Peavy or other people that we've run into at the SABR convention, or people we know through baseball and we've talked to them about it, have sort of shared their experiences. And most have said, you can go use the story like Peavy did, but some have been a little more reticent just because, there's a lot more there's more baggage around some of this stuff today than there might have been 50 years ago. And I just don't think they want to be getting called and then have to sort of, prove it, or have people unhappy with them for spilling the beans at this point.
Well, one of the disadvantages of being a writer who is not, Tom Verducci or somebody that has, everybody's phone number in his cell phone, is that you almost have to write the book for people to know that you're like legitimately, you're going to do a fair job on this topic. And then once the book is out, then everybody is willing to talk to you. But before that, I think it would be hard to call up, Mike Fires and say, hey, let's talk about the sign stealing thing. Let's go through that whole story again. It's a little bit, I think it's a little bit trickier. I did, the one guy I was able to talk to, again, also since the book came out, and this is actually my mistake. I had the opportunity, and I didn't really push it, is Dale Scott, the former longtime umpire, 30-year umpire, who's retired now and living in Portland, about 80 miles from me. And I had his phone number, and I couldn't think of exactly what angle I would have wanted him to talk about. And then I kind of let the deadline lapse. And then once I did talk to him, I said, oh my God, this guy's not only does he have really funny stories, but he's also completely open about talking about them. And it was mostly a lesson that we kind of already had learned by then, which is that none of this stuff has stopped. So I told him what I thought was pretty interesting story about that Dan just mentioned, about the Giants watering the infield at Candlestick Park to slow down the Dodgers, and he said, "Oh yeah, that still happens. We still have managers coming out and saying, hey, this dirt around the base," and it doesn't happen as often now because it's harder for, I think, the people in this call to identify like a base running team. I think that the teams are the running game is not as huge a weapon for teams as it used to be, but maybe that will change. But there is this sense of slowing down running teams, or especially if you yourself are not a running team, you have a bunch of plotters on your team. He said that kind of stuff still happens. There's still manipulations with the batter's circle and the coach's boxes, and so that's the one area that I happened to talk to him about. And he kind of was like laughing about it, like, this is my job. Our job is to sort of figure out what the tricky guys are doing today and try and keep it in check.
Have just thinking out loud with no preconceived thought about it on my part, with the pervasive growth of legalized gambling in sports, including baseball, is there, in your minds, given that you've done this research, and as you said, Mark, it's never ending, we continue to march on, is there any connection here between those two topics that might be of greater concern going forward?
Well, so let me just take two shots at that. One is, we purposely defined cheating to be things where teams, players, managers, grounds crew, clubhouse attendants, whoever did something against the rules to help their team win. So whether the Black Sox aren't part of that, collusion isn't part of that. I mean, I guess one could maybe make some arguments there, but so we didn't talk about that. So I would put gambling more into that bucket than our
Yeah.
cheating bucket. Having said that, I do think that, you know, I mean, the more pervasive gambling is, the more of a problem that it can be, irrespective of the cheating to help your team win. Obviously, I mean, certain people, I mean, one could certainly expand the definition of cheating to say,
Yeah.
I'm doing something that I'm breaking the rules, period, whether or not it's helping my team win or not. And again, I just think with sort of these micro bets, it's not like it was in 1919 where you got to get 8 guys to throw a game. I mean, you can
Yep.
get some, you know, batter, some, you know, recent call up who's not making much money, or some middle reliever, and, you know, bet on what he's going to do in the 7th inning. And so I do think that there's a lot more opportunity for bad stuff to happen, given the nature of and ubiquitousness of these types of bets.
Yeah, I would just add that one of the reasons why we defined it this way is that from the beginning, one of the things we wanted to explore was the relationship between innovation and cheating. And by innovation, we really are talking about the front offices and players that are particularly interested in sort of figuring out a way to, you know, game the rules to their advantage. So we're really talking about sort of the mad scientists, the smart guys, the smart front offices, the smart players, whatever. And I think that the instincts that would lead one to sort of throw a game, or as Dan was talking about, just throw a pitch, you know,
Yeah.
like that is sort of a different kind of personality and instinct, and therefore it didn't really fit sort of the kind of the
Yeah, you defined the cheating box. I think that's a really good answer. Yeah, that you got.
yeah. I think that was why.
Do you have any predictions about what the next cheating will be like?
Well, you know, it's really hard to say, obviously. I mean, I think on the medical side is where, you know, certainly the people are going to start bending the rules, and rules are going to happen. I mean, you know, a bunch of us on this call are old enough to remember the Bionic Man, you know, Lee Majors and the $6 Million Man. And it certainly wouldn't surprise me if, you know, some of these replacement parts that we're getting are actually better than the original. And it's not just taking a, you know, tendon from the thigh or the wrist to put in the elbow, but, you know, for the Tommy John surgery, but you're actually making the elbow better than it was. And so, I mean, at some point you're going to have, I think, things around that. We have the whole, you know, issues around genes and, you know, gene manipulation. And, is there going to be things that can be done there that are going to be much harder to detect? I mean, these are not necessarily, you know, baseball cheating stories. They're more of just sort of cheating in any, you know, sort of types of, you know, top level, highly competitive athletic competitions. And then I would say the other stuff, some of this database stuff, you know, relative to all the information coming around from the, you know, the Rapsodo and the Edgertronic. I mean, all of this data, the biometric data that teams and players are gathering on themselves. You know, what are the rules around them? And is there going to be ways to sort of exploit the data difference between knowledge around some of those biometric information from team to team, or, you know, player to player? And, you know, if you have data that other teams don't, is there a way to somehow exploit that unfairly?
So Dan, that's really insightful. And following that thought up, how do you guys see Major League Baseball in the front office being prepared, trying to be better prepared to keep ahead of this innovation movement, technology movement, whatever, to be prepared as opposed to having to react to it because they weren't prepared?
Well, I think that they're thinking about it. I mean, AJ Preller, as you guys remember, about 8 years ago was suspended. 7 years ago, was suspended for 30 days, the manager of the Padres. And it never officially came out why he was suspended, but the stories that came out around it had to do with sort of this data imbalance between what he knew and what he shared and what he was supposed to share. So I think baseball is aware that this can happen. on the medical side, I really don't know what they're doing, but I think on the data side, I think they're thinking about it. But again, at some point, this stuff is so sophisticated that it's just really hard to police. I think the commissioner's office does police stuff fairly well. I mean, I like to thinking back to, Judge Landis, where it was just sort of him and his one assistant. When there was all these sort of illegal moves going on by teams, they generally got away with it unless sort of a player complained and, Landis did his investigation. But I think that the, investigative side of baseball, I think they're more on top of it now. I do. But again, I'm not really all that, this is sort of really inside the commissioner's office and what their enforcement division looks like.
Well, in
Isn't
some
there a
ways,
risk? Isn't there a risk that they could get too far ahead of these things? I mean, if a doctor created a pill that would let people heal really well and it made players better, you wouldn't want to ban that maybe, but I could see how that could happen. Steroids are sort of like that.
Right. There's certainly a healing effect to steroids that, that affect that. I mean, look at what if one team had an advantage? Look, we know how to keep players from blowing out their elbows, and a player went from one team to another. Is he allowed to take that knowledge with him? How proprietary is that?
Yep.
Is it cheating if he tells his new team about how to keep his elbow from blowing out? Again, this step isn't there yet, but what are the rules going to be around the sort of how proprietary this player health information can be? I don't even know the right answer to a question like that.
Well, I think that one of the things that Dave said just then is something that's been bothering me of late. And this is just yet again something I don't have an answer for, because I think it's pretty complicated. Is that in the early years of people arguing or complaining or worried or whatever you want to say about steroid use back in the days of Ben Johnson and Lance Armstrong and whatnot, I think even if we didn't study the details, we know that they were going to bad people and getting stuff manufactured and doing things that gave them this advantage that we didn't want them to have, and therefore we had to stop this. And we, if you fast forward 20 years, you have a situation where a lot of people that we know are walking around with having taken steroids for good reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, my mother, who has had various parts of her body replaced over the years, I always joke with her, like, you would not be able to play in the Olympics because of the fact that she got a new, if she got a new hip, then they took, they got steroids, or she hurt her shoulder and would get steroids. I mean, it's happened sort of a handful of times over the years, and I look at something like, I have no idea what Fernando Tatis did, honestly, but what I do know. The only thing I do know is that he suffered a pretty bad injury. He was not playing. Okay, he was not part of the team, not part of the roster, not affecting the game on the field. And he took some substance that caused him to flunk a test. The substance he took was something that you could get at a pharmacy, right? It wasn't something where he had to go into some black market to get. It was something that any human could get. And his crime was not understanding the labels and not, the players are sort of responsible for what they put in their body. And he screwed that up. Okay. However, he also, the other thing that bothered me about it was like, well, I want Fernando Tatis to heal and play, right?
Yep.
So if in fact, and again, I want to stress it, I don't know, but if in fact he took this medication as part of some plan to get back on the field, I, as a fan, want that to happen. Okay, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know how, but it would be great if, and the same thing with Mark McGwire. I mean, if Mark McGwire, who was the person who mentioned this, 20 years ago to Bob Costas or whatever it was, and if you remember Mark McGwire pre-1998, he couldn't play, he couldn't stay on the field. That was his problem, right? He was hurt all the time. He's missing big chunks of seasons. And then if you look at his record in 1998, all of a sudden he played the whole season. That was the big change to McGwire. And again, I'm not saying that it was that he was being honest. I mean, there were more benefits to it than just staying on the field. But as a fan, I would like, I guess I want the players I root for to at least have the same tools to recover and play as my mother has. And I think that we've gotten where we are now is they do not have, if Tatis gets hurt and my mother gets hurt, my mother has tools at her disposal that she can use that Tatis can't. So I wish there was a way that, I guess, and I know there's flaws in this, but if I guess I would prefer a system where if you flunked a test, that the penalty is more like you can't play until you pass the test. Okay, so we want you to play as soon as you are no longer receiving benefits from this drug. But Tatis is not even on the roster, right? He's like at his house. And it just seems odd that he is not only can you not take steroids to play in games, but you can't even take steroids when you're not playing in games. Anyway, I've talked way too much.
No, I think that's really.
I just think to answer the original question that you asked that Dan answered, I think that a dilemma we're going to have going forward is, unless we rethink this, is that players are no longer told do not go into the back alley and buy these drugs from this criminal, but they're now being nabbed for taking this over-the-counter medication that, or not allowing the doctor to give them the drugs that everyone else is getting. So it feels just different to me.
So Mark, that's really good conversation. I guess I'm obviously very naive about this, but if I'm Fernando Tatis, and not trying to make him a bad guy here, but to say in the world we live in now, and my medical team said I should do the following so that I can return to play, what would, maybe this sounds totally stupid, prevent him from providing that information to Major League Baseball and saying, is this an acceptable regimen of medications to you that I can take to get back to playing? And put the onus on MLB to comment before rather than react after. And now he's cast, right or wrong, as a druggie. Is that not too naive? Is that too naive?
I mean, there's stuff in terms of the way these drugs work that I don't claim to understand, but I think that so I'd probably rather just leave it as that it makes me uncomfortable. But I do hear these excuses. Maybe I'm just this bleeding heart guy, but I do hear these excuses sometimes and say, well, what if that's actually true? You know, and I think that there are times when the players are making up excuses and they're not true. I mean, I think that's, but I also just kind of wonder, and there's a couple of things about the Tatis situation in particular that you guys probably know. One is that there's a much higher likelihood that when you are busted for flunking a test in MLB, it's much more likely that you're going to flunk the test if you're a Latino. And I'm not saying that they have racist tests. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that it may be an educational issue in terms of who their doctors are and whether they're doing stuff in the Dominican that's different, et cetera. But the other thing is that at the time, I read a story that suggested that at the time that Tatis may have had this problem, it was during the lockout, so he did not have access to the doctors, the team doctors. So there was a time when he may not have had the care that he could have had. But again, I think I'm a little bit out of my depth at this point. But I just wonder. And what Dan said about it's sort of, I didn't mean to make this about Tatis, but if you go back to what Dan said, if we do, I mean, medical technology is advancing all the time for regular people. And if you do have the ability to strengthen limbs or strengthen ligaments and whatnot, as a fan, do you want your favorite athletes or even non-favorite athletes to have access to that kind of improvement, given that it's healthy? I mean, one of the things that people thought about steroids even way back when was that, well, it could, really harm kids and it could kill people and whatnot. But if this is, under the control of a doctor, does that change your attitude about it?
The only thing I would say, add to all this, is I think, and I don't know where it is today, but there has been a therapeutic use exemption for steroids for a long time in most of the joint drug agreements. So I don't know whether there's any, I don't think they make it public, so I obviously don't know whether anybody has it today, but there is an ability on a very selective basis to, or at least there has been, to get a therapeutic use exemption for steroids.
Well, Dan, your answer to my question about how was Major League Baseball front office looking at this, it was interesting. It just led me to think about, for their own, sustainability, corporations have people like chief technology officers looking to see where technologies are going and how they could impact their business. Somewhat flippantly, but it almost seems, and maybe they have this, somebody within the front office whose job is to pay attention to these things and provide ongoing advice and suggestions, recommendations, concern to baseball leadership about, here's something coming, and then if we're not prepared, it could really catch us. And maybe they have that, but it seems like that sort of paying attention, looking over the horizon is very important given innovation and technology marching forward, as we've talked this morning.
Well, the only kind of is, baseball hired Theo Epstein to look at sort of to spearhead all these rule changes. And it wouldn't surprise me.
Maybe he's the answer.
He's looking at all that stuff. If he's not sort of looking at other things as well, he probably has a nice staff of people looking at this. So they may not be specifically charged with that, but I'm guessing if you're looking at all these different rule changes to speed up the game, you can't help but look at some of the other potential impacts.
Good response.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. It's been a fun hour.
Yeah.
We really had a good time. Does anybody have any more questions? Or
just like a comment to Dan and to Mark that how great the book is. Mark, I enjoyed your presentation very much about it at SABR 50, and today's conversation is enhancing my experience with the book. So thank you both for the book and for spending some of your Saturday morning with us.
this
Our
book
pleasure.
broke more
It's a lot
ground
of
for
fun.
us than any we've had before, I thought.
Yeah.
It really taught us some new stuff. I'm sorry.
No, thank you. I was just thanking you guys for the chance. So, and thanks, Dave, for your nice comments there as well.
And I'm not too proud to suggest that you spread the word to all of your friends and family. It's holidays coming up. You never know. You could have a baseball fan in your life. But that aside, it is pretty enjoyable. I've really enjoyed the conversations. I found. I don't think I've said this maybe to Dan, so hopefully he won't be mad at me. But I feel like I understand this issue more today than I did when the book first came out. Like I think the the questions that you guys ask and other people have asked have allowed me to sort of figure out how I feel about it all. I mean, because there is an ethical sort of moral element to, one of the questions I was asked at a bookstore in Seattle was, this woman stood up and goes, but don't you think it's all wrong? Don't you think that this is just a bad thing, that kids are watching the sport and whatever? So and that again is another point of view that I don't want to dismiss, that I think people want their, I feel like, I also feel like I have to tell people up front that, Dan and I love baseball. We love the history of baseball. We love the current baseball. We love almost all of the players. I mean, it's all great. This is not an expose at any way. We're trying to explain, like, this is the way we want our sports to be. This is the way our sports have always been, and they always will be. And I think that's I've enjoyed talking about it, because for myself, because I'm kind of figuring it out too still.
Well, in spite of what
people don't take steroids so they can flip burgers better. And if there's any cheating going on, it's because they chat 15 minutes into their shift before they start working. People bring a different attitude to different jobs.
I don't know, Mark, in spite of what you said an hour ago, what you and Dan subsequently said, you're gathering a lot of information for version 2.0 of this book. And hopefully someday in the future, we will have a chance to talk with you about that.
Yeah, the reason why it was recorded was it'll be on the SABR site, and I'll send out another email for the folks who didn't show up so they can see this again.
Appreciate it.
Great time.
Thank you,
Enjoy
guys.
your weekend, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Enjoy.
Appreciate it.
Take care. Bye.